Welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at a really fascinating document today.
We really are.
It was provided by you, the listener, and it's titled 011 Sharing Your Testimony .pdf.
Which is such an interesting text to dig into.
It is, and our mission today is to figure out exactly why a lived experience manages to completely bypass our intellectual defenses. We're going to be looking at a timeless biblical framework for crafting an authentic narrative of transformation.
Yeah, and it tackles this really strange paradox we're living in right now.
Right. Think about it. We live in a world drowning in data, and we're all completely cynical about corporate messaging and, institutional spin.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone's guard is up constantly.
Exactly. Yet at the exact same time, we are absolutely starved for authentic, lived experiences.
It's a fascinating tension to start with, because we are just constantly inundated with arguments, hot takes, curated personas. I mean, people are tired of being sold to.
Yeah, whether it's a product or a philosophy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the moment someone drops the talking points and simply says, here's what happened to me, the atmosphere in a room just shifts.
It really does.
We are fundamentally wired to organize our realities through narrative, which makes a sincere account of personal transformation incredibly difficult to dismiss.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the core argument we're looking at essentially boils down to this idea that arguments build walls, but stories open doors.
That's the crux of it.
Right.
Yeah.
If someone comes at me with a heavy theological or philosophical argument, my immediate reflex is to evaluate it. I start looking for the holes in their logic, and I put my guard up.
It's a natural defense mechanism.
Yeah. Facts inform us, sure,
Yeah.
but they don't capture the imagination. A story seems to just bypass all that intellectual armor and walk right through the front door.
And there is a very real psychological and neurological reason for that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When you hear an argument, the brain's analytical centers light up. You are in a defensive posture, assessing threat or assessing validity. But when you hear a story, your brain activity actually begins to sync with the storytellers.
Wow.
It's called neural coupling. You aren't being asked to concede a debate point. You are being invited to temporarily step into someone else's shoes.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. In a culture saturated with information overload, abstract theological concepts can feel incredibly cold. Shifting the conversation from a debate about religious systems to a moment of personal discovery, well, it completely disarms the listener's skepticism.
Think about how that actually plays out in real life for you listening. If you're at a dinner party and someone starts reciting statistics on existential well-being.
They're checking your watch.
Exactly. You're looking for an exit strategy. But the second someone lowers their voice and says, hey, can I tell you what I went through last year? Everyone leans in.
The dynamic completely flips.
The speaker isn't demanding your submission to a set of rules. They're offering vulnerability.
Exactly. It builds a relational bridge. You
Yeah.
can argue against someone's interpretation of a text all day long, but you cannot argue with their lived experience. It moves the truth out of the realm of the theoretical and grounds it in human reality.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this isn't some modern communication strategy cooked up by a PR firm last week.
Not at all.
The foundational blueprint for this is ancient. We see it vividly in the historical record of Acts chapter 26. This is when the Apostle Paul is standing before King Agrippa and the Roman officials. And if you know the context there, the stakes could not possibly be higher.
They are literal life and death stakes.
Right.
Paul is facing a tribunal. He's standing in front of seasoned politicians, Roman governors, religious elites who are highly suspicious of him, and they hold his fate in their hands. This is a moment that demands a bulletproof defense.
Right. And Paul's uniquely equipped for that. I mean, he was a Pharisee, a scholar. He was deeply educated in Jewish law and Greek philosophy.
Highly trained.
Yeah. He could have delivered an absolute masterclass in theological apologetics right there. He could have debated the finer points of prophetic fulfillment for hours.
Easily.
But he doesn't. He pivots entirely. He just tells his own story.
And that rhetorical choice is profound. By opting for personal narrative over abstract doctrine, Paul establishes the exact before and counter-after framework that the source document says we use to structure testimonies today.
Right.
He takes concepts like grace, redemption, and divine intervention, and he puts flesh on them. He tells them who he was before, the specific moment his trajectory was interrupted, and who he became as a result.
Wow.
He effectively forces the tribunal to reckon not with a new philosophy, but with a transformed human being standing right in front of them.
So let's look at that framework, because it's highly practical for you listening right now. It breaks down into three distinct phases.
Yes.
The first is the before phase. Now, the goal here isn't to glorify past mistakes.
No, not at all.
It's about establishing honest context. It's sharing the relatable emptiness, the moral striving, or the distinct lack of peace you experienced without a relationship with God.
Honesty in this initial phase is what buys you credibility with your listener. If you sanitize your past or pretend you always had it all together,
Yeah.
people immediately sense the artificiality.
You can smell it a mile away.
Right. Conversely, if you exaggerate your flaws, it feels performative. But when you accurately describe your spiritual and emotional landscape before grace intervened, you are laying the groundwork. You are showing the listener the depth of the void, which makes the subsequent transformation actually mean something.
Let's put flesh on this. Say someone's before wasn't some dramatic life of crime. Maybe it was just a quiet, crushing struggle with career anxiety and an obsession with being in control.
That's very common.
If they are honest about how exhausting that was, how it bled into their marriage, how it kept them up at night, that immediately resonates, right?
Precisely. Because the listener might be sitting there experiencing that exact same exhaustion. You've established common ground. Which brings us to the pivot, the encounter phase.
Right.
This is where the narrative shifts from the before to the intervention. And the absolute key here is that this phase is fundamentally about divine initiative. The focus has to remain on what God did, not on your own cleverness or your sudden moral willpower.
And there's a vital distinction to be made here. The source material emphasizes that an encounter doesn't have to look like Paul's blinding light on the Damascus Road.
Right, that's a huge misconception.
We tend to hold that up as the gold standard, but the reality is often much quieter. Think of Timothy's story from the text. His faith was a gradual unfolding, nurtured over time. Both are equally valid because the central truth is the same. Christ intervened.
That's a crucial point, because modern church culture often mistakenly prioritizes sensationalism over steady faithfulness. We want the cinematic moment.
Yeah, the movie version.
Exactly. But a gradual realization of grace over a period of months or years is just as supernatural as a sudden dramatic conversion. The encounter phase is simply about communicating how that grace became real and personal to you, regardless of the timeline.
Which leads us into the final phase, the after. This is detailing the observable transformation, how your priorities shifted, how your relationships healed, how your internal peace changed. But I can easily hear a listener thinking, well, if I talk about my after, doesn't it sound like I'm claiming I have everything figured out?
That is the most common hesitation. But after, emphatically, does not mean perfection.
Good.
A testimony isn't a declaration that you no longer struggle or make mistakes. It is a declaration of a change in direction. It means you have a new anchor, a new sense of purpose, and you are on an ongoing journey. Showing the listener that grace is actively sustaining you in your current imperfections is often much more powerful than presenting a flawless, finished product.
But listening to this entire before, encounter, after structure, I know exactly what's crossing the minds of a lot of people. They're thinking, sure, that works if you have a compelling history. But I grew up in the suburbs, went to youth group, lived a pretty moral life. My story is incredibly ordinary. It's just too boring to matter. How do we handle the ordinary testimony?
What's fascinating here is how the idea of the ordinary story being ineffective is a complete myth.
A myth.
A complete myth. In fact, in a world characterized by chaos and burnout, a story of quiet, steady obedience and subtle transformation is incredibly compelling. Look at Joseph's ark in Egypt from the text.
Okay, yeah.
We all know the story. It wasn't a Damascus Road flash. It was decades of a slow, grueling burn of faithfulness amidst deep injustice and mundane daily tasks. Yet his witness is foundational. God uses seemingly ordinary, quiet lives to display extraordinary, sustaining grace. Your ordinary story of finding peace in a chaotic world is exactly the lifeline someone else is looking for.
Okay, so whether your story is dramatic or ordinary, there are still traps we can fall into when communicating it. The document highlights 3 specific pitfalls that can severely weaken a testimony. The first one is exaggeration.
Yes.
There's this subtle, almost unconscious temptation to amplify our past struggles just to make the eventual rescue seem more impressive.
And it's a trap born out of that desire for sensationalism we just talked about. But dramatizing the past completely undermines your authenticity.
It backfires.
Totally.
Yeah.
Authenticity will always trump performance. If your audience senses for even a second that you are embellishing the details to evoke a reaction, they will intellectually and emotionally disengage. The raw, unvarnished truth resonates far deeper than any theatrics ever could.
The second pitfall is self-centeredness. which feels counterintuitive because you're literally telling your story, so naturally you're the main character.
You think so?
Right. But we have to be careful not to make ourselves the hero of the narrative.
Exactly. It's a fine line. If the story subtly becomes about your own incredible resilience, or your superior intellect in finding the truth, or your sheer moral willpower to change your life, it ceases to be a testimony of God's grace.
What does it become then?
It basically devolves into a self-help motivational speech. The focus must relentlessly point back to the Savior. Christ is the hero who initiated the rescue. You are simply the grateful recipient.
And the third pitfall is overcomplication. We get bogged down in the weeds. But I want to push back on this for a second.
Sure.
I get keeping it simple, but isn't there a risk of making the story feel too rehearsed or sanitized if we cut out all the complicated nuances of our lives? How do we balance simplicity with raw honesty?
That is the tension you have to navigate. Overcomplication doesn't mean hiding the mess. It means losing the thread of the narrative.
Okay, I see.
It happens when we overload the listener with excessive background details, confusing side quests, or heavy theological jargon that an outsider wouldn't understand.
Right, insider language.
Exactly. Balancing simplicity with honesty means focusing on the main arc of your transformation. You can absolutely mention the deep complexities of your struggle, but you don't need to explain the backstory of every single person involved. You keep the through line clear so the listener can easily grasp the transforming power of the encounter without getting lost in the footnotes.
So practically speaking, how do we actually prepare this? The recommendation in the text is to craft two distinct versions of your story, a 2-minute version and a 10-minute version. Let's talk about what those actually sound like in the wild.
Well, the 2-minute version is built for everyday, casual interactions. Think of a quick chat over coffee, a conversation with a coworker in the break room, or a serendipitous moment on an airplane.
You don't have an hour.
Right, you don't have time for a sweeping epic. It requires conciseness. A quick snapshot of your before context, a brief mention of the moment or season of grace, and the observable change. It acts as a conversational bridge to see if the person is open to hearing more.
Right. It might sound something like, a few years ago I was so consumed by my career that I was making myself miserable. But I ended up having this profound realization of God's grace during that season that completely shifted my worth away from my job title. It hasn't been perfect, but the peace I have now is night and day.
That's a great example.
It's an invitation. And then the 10-minute version is for when they accept that invitation.
Precisely. The 10-minute version is for deeper conversations. Maybe you're in a small group, mentoring someone, or having a long dinner with a friend who is actively seeking answers.
You have more runway.
Yeah, this version gives you the breathing room to add texture. You can include the specific life circumstances, the emotional natures, the specific people who impacted you, and weave in the scriptural insights that anchored your journey. Having both versions mentally prepared ensures you are never caught off guard, regardless of the context.
But you don't just write these versions in a vacuum and hope for the best. The document places a strong emphasis on accountability and practice.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, practicing your testimony is not about rote memorization so you sound like an infomercial.
No one wants that.
Right. It is about gaining comfort. Practicing with a trusted mentor or an accountability partner is vital. It refines your clarity. It helps you identify where you might be rambling or where you accidentally made yourself the hero.
It's a safeguard.
It really is. It is the practical application of the proverb, iron sharpens iron. A loving critique of your delivery turns your anxiety into readiness, ensuring that the message of grace is what truly takes center stage.
And there's a fascinating psychological and spiritual angle to all this preparation that the text brings up. We look back at the historical account in Joshua chapter 4. The Israelites have just miraculously crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. God commands them to take 12 large stones from the very middle of the riverbed where the danger was, where the miracle actually happened, and build a physical memorial on the bank.
It's a powerful image.
The entire purpose of these stones was to provoke a question from future generations. Children would walk by and ask, "What do these stones mean?"
It is a profound analogy for why we write our stories down today. Human beings suffer from acute spiritual amnesia.
We forget so easily.
We do.
Yeah.
When we don't intentionally anchor our memories, the profound things God has done in our lives easily fade into the background noise of our daily routines. The physical act of writing down your testimony serves as your modern-day memorial stone.
I love that.
It forces you to externalize your reflection and trace the arc of redemptive work in your own life. It bolsters your own faith in seasons of doubt, and it preserves the memory of grace, so you are fully prepared when someone looks at your life and essentially asks, what do the stones in your life mean?
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The core takeaway is that you do not need a theology degree or a perfect cinematic past to be a compelling witness. Your lived experience, exactly as it is with all its ordinary details, is the perfect bridge.
It really is.
It is the tool that connects high-level, abstract truth with genuine human need. You have a narrative of grace that no one else on earth can tell, and it is uniquely designed to reach people who might never listen to a sermon, but who will absolutely listen to you.
And this brings us to a final thought to consider. We often treat a testimony as a closed chapter, like a neatly tied bow on an event that happened years ago. But what if the messy, unresolved, and challenging parts of your life right now are actually the most vital part of your witness?
That's a shift in perspective.
The very struggles you think disqualify you from having a finished testimony might be the exact venue where your current raw reliance on grace is on full display. Your story isn't a museum piece. It's a living, ongoing narrative, and your present dependence on God in the middle of the mess might be the exact evidence of grace someone else desperately needs to see today.
We hope this framework gives you the clarity and the courage to look at your own journey, build those memorial stones, and share the story only you can tell. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.